G'day chaps, and welcome to my Elite Dangerous Powerplay guide. I'm going to try and bring you the 3 things that you really need to know about this guide. Now firstly, who is this for? This is for anyone who is, like me, trying to get to grips with this massive update, trying to understand everything that's in it. It's enormous and it changes the game drastically. So I've been researching it all day. I'm just going to add a little caveat here that this was released less than 24 hours ago, the beta. So I may have missed 1 or 2 things. I'll also add another caveat that if you're watching this after the beta is finished and you're playing the full release version of Powerplay, some of the things may have changed. So just take it with a pinch of salt, I suppose. Okay, now the first thing I'm going to talk about 3 things. The first thing I'm going to talk about is an overview of exactly what Powerplay is, what it involves, how it changes the game. I'll explain what it means for you as a player. Secondly, I'm going to go into what the major changes are that are not included in the overview. So that's point 2. And then thirdly, I'll explain something of how Powerplay actually works, how the powers work, because it's quite complicated. So, point 1, firstly, the overview. Now then, what is Powerplay? Powerplay is, in essence, an additional layer to the game. So, whereas before there were 2 layers, now we have 3. So previously we had minor factions, and minor factions are small, they relate to local governance only, so things like running stations. And then you had major factions, and we all know these. These are the Federation, the Empire, and the Alliance. Now this adds an entirely new layer between these. Joining is optional, so you can carry on playing as you were before. You can be completely independent. You don't need to be involved if you don't want to be. Also, minor and major factions have not changed at all. So apart from some minor name changes in minor factions to distinguish them from others, location-wise, there's no other change. Okay, now each power, and there are 10 to begin with. There are 10 to begin with, and this will rise to a maximum of 20. Each power has a capital. Now that capital is important, and I'll return to that, but just take that point. Each power has a capital. Also, another thing here is that powers are separate from factions in terms of rankings. So you might have your rankings, well everybody does, everybody has rankings with the major factions, and you've done that through trading, fighting, exploring, whatever. Now the rankings with powers are separate, and the rankings with powers will, from what I understand, they're going to degrade slightly over time. So if you get to be allied with a certain power, and then you don't play for 6 months, when you return to the game, you'll find that your ranking has decreased quite significantly. I don't know the degree of degradation of ranking, but there it is. Now, some other powers, of course, are going to be independent of factions. Some are within factions, some are like senators in a federation, and obviously you have members of the Empire, and some are entirely independent. Another point. Minor factions can become powers if they're successful enough. We're not quite sure how this will transpire yet. They've talked about community goals, so it is very possible that community goals which existed before are now linked to powers, and minor factions. There might be a community goal around a minor faction if there's enough activity around that minor faction to make them become a power. And we'll find out weekly, and I'll return to this point, we'll find out weekly what's happening. So, powers will always aim to expand, and powers are essentially territorially based. So, as Frontier themselves say in a guide that they've released, Let me just find it here. At its heart, power play is a battle for territory. And that's a direct quote. So we're talking about power in its realist terms, land if it were an analogy of Earth. So powers will always aim to expand. They're reviewed weekly, so they have weekly cycles, and this is a completely new thing. Everything that happens with powers is reviewed on a weekly basis. So there's now this concept of cycles that we have to get our heads around. I'm not quite sure when the cycle will begin or end, but I imagine it will be, a weekend to make it manageable, or a Monday. If there is no expansion for extended periods, it's possible that powers will collapse. And I'll return to this point too, because that needs a little extra explanation. It's not quite that simple. Now, just continuing on, power leaders may die. That's something they've hinted at. At this point, it's unknown how likely it is that this will happen. I've been into the beta and looked around, and I think the oldest was 114, the oldest power faction. Sorry, the power leader. I shouldn't say faction, it's confusing. The oldest leader of a power was 114 years old. So they've obviously projected, and in the future these people will live much longer. So I imagine the chance of them dying is really quite low, but it is possible. Okay, next point. As powers expand, there'll be escalating costs and supply line issues based on the distance from the capital. Now, this goes back to what I talked about earlier. Each power will have a capital, and it will become more costly for that power as it grows. So and I'll explain this in a second, each power has what are called control systems, and these control systems actually cost the equivalent of credits. And I'll explain how that works. So each power has control systems. These cost the power essentially credits, and each control system costs more the further away it is from the capital, so from the home system. So there is an increasing cost of expansion. Okay, so every power will be more efficient the smaller it is, and less efficient the bigger it is. So just bear that in mind. Okay, next point. Powers may work together. It's possible, but it will depend on their traits, on their how they are. I imagine this means that aggressive militaristic powers probably won't be working together very often. More pacifistic ones might work together with other pacifistic ones. We don't know yet at this point. It's yet to be expanded upon, and we'll find out in due course, but that is possible, so we'll see how that develops. Next point. There is no exploration power as such, but it seems that some will have exploration perks. There does seem to be one power that is like pirate, and there's one other that's a kind of utopian at this stage, so that's for all the crazies that want to go there. And then the rest seem to be loosely grouped around either fighting or finance. That's more or less on that somewhere on that scale. Okay, next point. I kind of mentioned this before. Community goals will still exist, but can connect with power play now. So factions can be elevated to a power. I've covered that already. Next point. Changes to which power controls the system will apply to anyone, even if you're not aligned to any power. Okay, so let's say, for example, you didn't want to get involved in power play, you wanted to be completely independent, and you'd found yourself a kind of home in a certain system. If that was taken over by a power, you will still be affected by the changes to that system. So these will be game-wide changes to whatever system is dominated by the power. So these are major changes to the game. In effect, this means that the markets and the laws in that system will change. So things could become illegal that weren't illegal before and vice versa. Okay, next point, we're still on the overview here. Defecting will spawn NPCs from the power you're leaving to come and attack you. And the higher ranked you are within that power, the longer you'll be hunted. So you will be able to leave any faction, any power, sorry. You can do this at any time, but the higher ranked you are, the more penalties you'll receive if you are defecting to another power. They will allow you to take the perks, some of the perks you've received with you. They say that if you can also simply leave a power if you want to. You can become independent. If you simply leave a power, you'll lose all of the perks from that power, but you'll get to keep any modules you've bought, but that's it. That's the end of it. If you defect to another power that seems to be different, you may be able to take some of the perks you've gained with you, but then you'll be hunted, and it seems like you'll be hunted throughout space by mercenaries hired by the power that you've left. So I imagine that will be fairly serious. Okay, next point. Penalties are minor for switching if you've not advanced very far. Now this lets you try a few out, which I think is quite a good system. You're going to want to play around and see which fits your play style. So yeah, not having major penalties. There'll be a small cooldown time. It seems like half a day is the cooldown time for switching powers, but it's not a particular problem. And finally, it seems like there's a major change to bounties. So bounties with a power can't be paid off now. Now, just to make this clear, bounties are not penalties or fines. So there is a difference. Bounties are going to be incurred for major transgressions. So, you know, you go and you murder an innocent, then you're going to have a bounty on your head and the police will hunt you. And you can't just go and pay that off anymore. You're going to have to run and hide, leave that power, from what I understand. I don't think this applies to the major faction. That may be the case, I'm not quite sure yet. But it's certainly the case that bounties can't be paid off, and these are different from penalties or fines. These fines, however, so you can pay off fines as normal. However, if you don't pay off your fines within a week, they become bounties. So you get the chance to pay off your fines if you're negligent. If you don't pay them off, they become bounties and you're going to be hunted in the following week. So it's always going to be worth paying off your fines from now on. They're going to have more serious consequences. Right, that's the end of the overview. I hope that helps you understand a little bit about what power play actually is. I'll now go into the second major point, and this is the major other changes that are in the update before I go into how the powers actually operate, how they work. Okay, so major other changes. Firstly, you now can see your progress through the different ratings from the very beginner ratings up to elite. So you've now got a progress bar, very intuitive, very simple to follow, and that's going to help you track, because before it would just be a complete surprise when you ranked up. Okay, secondly, missions are now linked to ratings with roughly increasing rewards. So there are some trading missions or combat missions or other kinds of missions that you can only do if you're a certain rank. Yeah, that's pretty self-explanatory. Next point. You can now find targets in supercruise, meaning that for combat missions, your targets could be anywhere in a system. You don't need to go around dropping into each separate instance to see if they're there or not, and knowing that more or less sooner or later they're going to be there. But that was quite tedious previously. Now they could be anywhere in a system. You're just going to have to hunt as you would a human player. Next point, mining missions are now available from the mission screen. These are going to depend on your trade ranking, but you can now pick up a mining mission, go out and find that resource, and yeah, they seem to be, from what I can tell, reasonably lucrative for some of them. So mining has had a major overhaul, and seems to be more of a realistic way of playing in the game now, which is very welcome because I tried it before and it was awful. Okay, next point. Friendly fire is now relaxed. Rather than being a bounty as it was before, friendly fire should just now be a fine that you can go and pay off. So this relates to what I talked about earlier. Don't need to worry quite so much about friendly fire. Yes, it's still going to be annoying. Yes, it's still going to happen, but it's not going to be a serious problem where you're going to be blown up for it or hunted. Okay, next point. You can now plot routes directly from the system map, which is fantastic. So you can go into the system you want to look at. You can choose the planet or the station you want to go to. You can choose that and it will remember your choice. Also, a very minor thing, but I'll include it because it was annoying previously. Every time you switch in and out of the galactic map, it should remember exactly where you were last looking at. Because previously you'd be looking at a certain system, you'd drop out of the galactic map, you go back in, you had to find it again. Quite annoying. Now it's fixed. Right. Next point. This is again about mining. I'm not going to go into much detail. You'll see in other videos that it's been covered quite comprehensively, but you can now get drones to help you with your mining. They'll pick up the ore or whatever for you. It's become far easier and far quicker and far less painful in essence. There are several components that you're going to need to buy to do mining, and it seems like you can only have as many drones out there picking up the ore for you as you have component slots. But I'll leave you to go and investigate that by yourself because that's for another video. Okay, next point, and again this has been covered by every man and his dog. There are two new ships, the Imperial Courier and the Diamondback. I'm not going to go into that in great detail because that's covered elsewhere. Next point. You can now transfer fuel to other ships. Now this is going to be fantastic because I've actually run out of fuel in the past and it can be troublesome. You have to self-destruct and there's nothing else you can do. Very good for wings. We still don't seem to be able to transfer cash between ships, but if we can help each other with fuel, we can also transfer goods. So we can do much more in the way of working together in a real sense now. Okay, next major change. You now have penalties for hitting ships around stations. There are different levels of penalty depending on the degree of damage that you inflict. So if it's shield only damage, it's not too bad. If you inflict damage on the hull, it's worse. And obviously if you blow them up, you're in serious trouble. This will only be incurred, I understand, if you're going over the speed limit. I'm not quite sure how we're supposed to find out what that speed limit is. So, but yeah, try not to hit other ships, you might get in trouble. And finally, you'll be able to see the Galnet news from your cockpit soon. They haven't actually implemented that at this stage, as I'm looking at beta, but that is coming soon, and that will be great because it means you don't need to dock at a station to see what's going on. Okay, running into rather lengthy time, but I'll carry on. Third point now, how do the powers actually work? I'm not going to go into this in too great a level of detail because it is very complicated. I could make a separate video, and I might in fact do that, on how the powers actually operate. Frontier have actually produced an entire document about this, and it took me about half an hour to read it and understand it, so I think this is perhaps a separate video that I'll expand on later. But for the moment I'll just give the overview. So how do the powers work? In essence, you have something called Command Capital. Now this is going to be abbreviated to CC everywhere. So we can refer to it as CC as well. It stands for Command Capital. Now, how do Frontier describe it themselves? Command Capital. Each power uses a resource command called Command Capital to pay for its endeavors. CC represents a combination of financial, political, and social weight that can be channeled into use by the power. Now, I take that to mean that these are basically credits. So each power is going to have credits, and these credits are generated by the number of systems they control and can exploit. And yeah, the fewer credits they have, the more trouble they'll get into. Now, to explain a little bit, there are going to be two kinds of systems that are important to a power, let's put it that way. So firstly, you have something called control systems. Now, these control systems are the ones that the power has expanded directly into. So if we were going to imagine this was real life, the power would have gone in and taken over those systems. That would be the home system, the base system rather, of that power in that area. Not the home system, because that kind of implies the capital. So let's take this as the base system of a particular area. Now this control system is key because it means that that power can then exploit all other systems within a 15 light year radius. And it's through exploiting systems that the power actually gains capital, command capital. So the control systems, let's make this clear, the control systems actually cost CC to maintain. So let's take an example. You have a system that the power wants to go in and take over. They go in, they take it over. This control system costs them, for example, 150 CC. But all of the systems around in a 15 light year radius generate 300 CC. That means that the power is generating a net CC of 150 gain. Okay, so yeah, this will all be, and I've checked, this is all visible from within the galactic map. When you click on the power play and you look on expansion, it breaks this all down quite nicely. But as I mentioned before, the cost of those control systems increase depending on the distance from the capital, and exploited systems bring in the CC income. So when we're looking at expanding, be it whatever power you're in, it's pretty important that you go in and check that that control system and its surrounding exploited systems are going to generate a profit for the power. Otherwise there's literally no point in going in and taking it. And actually going in and taking it could result in trouble for your power. And the reason for that is that if the power, and this is the next point now, so it's a little complicated, but let me try and break it down. If the power doesn't have enough CC in a cycle, then the most expensive control systems will go into turmoil. So in that cycle, let's say there's a cycle, it's week 1, and that power doesn't have enough CC. The most expensive will go into turmoil in the next cycle, so in the next week. If that power does not regain enough CC, those systems that were in turmoil previously will go into open revolt. Now when they go into open revolt, the power will lose control of the systems, and they'll be open for other powers to come in and take, or they'll become independent. And that's important because if a system is under control or it's under exploitation, it cannot be taken by another power. So there will be fairly rigid borders between these powers. Now the sort of nuance in there, or the next sort of point within this, is that players can go in and undermine the control systems of their neighboring powers, and vice versa. You can go in and actually bolster the control systems of your own power if you see that the opposing power is trying to undermine yours. Okay, and this is why I need to make another video on it, because it's really quite complicated, but I think I'm covering the basics here. Okay, I'll just mention a couple of other points here and then I'll be done because I'm running out of time. Supporters can fortify control systems to reduce their drain on the power's CC reserves. So let's say, for example, a power has gone in, they've taken over a control system. In the following cycle, the supporters can go in and actually choose to fortify it, and this is what it's called in the game. This reduces the drain on the power's CC reserve. So in the example I was just talking about, let's say the power doesn't have enough CC to maintain all of its control systems, and one of them is in turmoil. What the supporters of that power need to do is to go into other systems and fortify them, because that reduces the overall cost of CCs to that power, and then they can kind of afford to keep the systems that are in turmoil. Okay, I think I've covered it. That was quite a lot. If you if you bared with me this far, then I appreciate it very much, and I hope you found this useful. Please also appreciate that I've done this within 24 hours of the beta being released, so it's not quite as polished as I like my videos to usually be, but I wanted to get this out there for you, and I hope you find it helpful. I'll make something a little bit better when I have more time. So thank you very much, guys. As always, if you like this, please hit the thumbs up button because it does help me on YouTube. And if you want to see my other guides and updates, then please subscribe, of course. And yeah, I appreciate your attention. See you later, guys.